Widespread water shortages caused by rising global temperatures could lead to food shortages and mass migration, an expert has warned. The head of the World Meteorological Society, Michel Jarrod, has warned that of all the threats posed by a warming climate, shrinking water supplies are the most serious. It is predicted that by 2025, some 2.8 billion people will live in water-scarce areas, a huge rise from the 1.6 billion who do now. Parts of Africa, the Middle East and Asia will be worst affected, with pockets of Australia, the US and Southern Europe also predicted to suffer. Mr. Jarrod told Carbon Brief that although it has been a few years since a spate of major food crises, all the ingredients are there for a food crisis to come back on a very large scale. Earlier this week, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, announced that Southern Africa faces food shortages, as drought, exacerbated by the El Niño weather pattern, delays planting and stunts crops across the region. The presence of a strong El Niño episode in 2015-16 raises serious concerns regarding the impact on food insecurity, the FAO said in the alert. A coffee shortage is looming. Droughts in Brazil are expected to cause harvests of popular Robusta and Arabica beans to drop by almost 10% over the next year. Combined with the fact that global demand for the product is predicted to increase, a shortage of coffee looks inevitable. Foreign Agricultural Services Global Coffee Production Report says Brazil's Robusta harvest is forecast to decline 3.7 million bags to 13.3 million. Arabica output is forecast to fall 1.2 million bags to 36.1 million on lower yields following January's dry growing conditions in Minas Gerais and São Paulo, two regions that account for about 80% of output. The report warned global exports and consumption are forecast at record quantities, meaning there will likely be a shortage in future when growing conditions are not as exceptional in other regions, which are currently making up for Brazil's deficit. Often we think about climate change in terms of temperature, but actually the most important parameter which will be affected is the water cycle, Mr. Jarrod said. In a water-stressed area, there will be even more stress on the water resources. He believes global warming will make the problem worse, by disrupting established weather patterns, leading to less rainfall in certain areas, depleting groundwater supplies. The frequency and intensity of heatwaves will increase and the frequency and intensity of droughts in some parts of the world will increase, he warned. Mr. Jarrod also warned that diseases will likely affect new parts of the world that didn't have to battle them before. As the world's population grows, the food shortage problem is set to get worse, The Independent reported. The UN has predicted the global population will rise to 11.2 billion by the end of the century, from its current level of 7.3 billion, with a lot of the growth coming from Africa, an area that is already stretched for resources. Food shortages 3 times more likely due to climate change. Global food shortages will become 3 times more likely as a result of climate change, and the international community needs to be ready to respond to price shocks to prevent civil unrest, a joint US-British task force warned in August. Rather than being a once-a-century event, severe production shocks, including food shortages, price spikes and market volatility, are likely to occur every 30 years by 2040, said the Task Force on Extreme Weather and Global Food System Resilience. With the world's population set to rise to 9 billion by 2050 from 7.3 billion today, food production will need to increase by more than 60%, and climate-linked market disruptions could lead to civil unrest, the report said. The climate is changing and weather records are being broken all the time, said David King, the UK Foreign Minister's Special Representative for Climate Change, in the report. The risks of an event are growing, and it could be unprecedented in scale and extent. Globalization and new technologies have made the world's food system more efficient, but it has also become less resilient to risks, he said. Some of the major risks include a rapid rise in oil prices fueling food costs, reduced export capacity in Brazil, the United States or the Black Sea region due to infrastructure weakness, and the possible depreciation of the US dollar causing prices for dollar-listed commodities to spike. Global food production is likely to be most impacted by extreme weather events in North and South America and Asia, which produce most of the world's four major crops: maize, soybean, wheat, and rice. But such shocks in production or price hikes are likely to hit some of the world's poorest nations hardest, such as import-dependent countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the report said. In fragile political contexts where household food insecurity is high, civil unrest might spill over into violence or conflict, the report said. The Middle East and North Africa region is of particular systemic concern, given its exposure to international price volatility and risk of instability, its vulnerability to import disruption and the potential for interruption of energy exports. To ease the pain of increasingly likely shocks, the report urged countries not to impose export restrictions in the event of wild weather, as Russia did following a poor harvest in 2010.